Hey everyone, welcome to our webcast today. Hi, this is Urgent Please Fix ASAP, Critical Vulns and Bug Bounty Programs, the presentation Kymberlee Price gave during Black Hat this year. This program is going to be about 40 minutes with time to answer questions afterwards. Please feel free to ask Kim questions throughout the presentation by typing them into the questions pane in the GoToWebinar software. And Kymberlee will be answering all your questions after the presentation. We're also recording this session, which will be available for you later this afternoon, as well as the slides. Now on to our speaker. Kymberlee Price is our Senior Director of Researcher Ops here at BugCrowd. She's responsible for directing all of the efforts of our global team of researchers, more than 19,000 of them, optimizing all the vulnerability reporting performance for customers and researchers, and helping our crowd with ongoing skill development and overall success. Without further ado, Kymberlee, take it away.
Thank you so much, Peyton. So, as Peyton mentioned, I'm working here at BugCrowd to lead the security research team, the crowd as we call them. But before this, I worked on the defensive side in a security response team at BlackBerry for about 4.5 years. And so I've been on the receiving end of a lot of vulnerability reports of varying quality. Before that, was doing data analysis and internet crime investigation with Microsoft, but my educational training is actually in behavioral psychology. So understanding how to develop a program to get the behavior you want out of it. So I'm looking forward to talking with you today about how to work within a bounty program and get great results. So really quick agenda, I'm going to cover some data from a variety of bug bounty programs across the industry on the results they're getting. We'll talk about some very specific critical vulnerabilities that have been reported. We'll talk on the defensive side of things. How can a bounty program owner get to that signal faster and weed through the noise and get those best possible results? And then there's a brief summary and some questions. It's important to get out of the way right now what this talk isn't. I'm not going to be talking about how you can decide if your company is ready for a bug bounty program. I'm not going to try to convince you should do a bug bounty program, and I'm not going to try to recruit you to be a bug bounty hunter. This is about the bugs, and while I'm more than happy to talk to folks about any of these things, that's not the focus of the next 40 to 50 minutes. So without further ado, let's talk about some bounty programs and the statistics around vulnerabilities that they've reported. So we're going to start with Google, and Google has multiple bounty reward programs. I am, for the sakes of this presentation, only going to talk about a specific segment of that, the VRP, the Vulnerability Reward Program. This does not include the Patch Reward Program, it does not include the Chrome Reward Program, and it does not include the Android Reward Program that was just started this year. What it does include is Google.com, YouTube.com, Blogger.com, Google developed applications and extensions in the Google Play, iTunes, and Chrome web stores. So still a fairly significant amount of Google products are included. And when we look at their data, they've issued a report on the 2014 results of the Vulnerability Rewards Program. And this is the breakdown of submissions. You can see that large green section, that's noise. Those are invalid reports. And anything in red resulted in a bug being filed. Now, some of them didn't get a reward. So whether they were duplicates, whether it was out of scope, there are valid submissions that are simply out of scope. Some things get credit, some things don't get credit. Maybe they're bugs but not security bugs. So there's a variety of things that don't get rewards. When you start looking for the rewardable vulnerabilities, it's down here in the lower right-hand corner. They don't give the raw number of these sections, but I think it's pretty fair to say from this heat map that the rewardable submissions are less than 20% of the total. However, that might lead you to question, is this a worthwhile program? And when you start looking at the types of those vulnerabilities and think about what is Google paying $5,000 for, or $3,133.70 for, things like that, you get an idea of the significance of the vulnerabilities they're receiving. So breaking down their reward distribution, again, is available in their reporting online. They have the vast majority of money being sent to the finders of high-risk issues. So this is delivering clear value to product security. These researchers hit big money. If we conservatively look at that $5,000 reward line and look at $300,000 paid out in $5,000, that's 60 vulnerabilities. 60 vulnerabilities that received a fairly significant reward. If you drop down one line and you slightly underestimate that $3,133 line and say that's $200,000 paid in roughly $3,000 chunks, that's 64 vulnerabilities. So right there, we're looking at 120 plus vulnerabilities that Google was able to get disclosed to them. They were able to patch, protect customers, and that's what makes it worth dealing with that big green block of noise to them. Now, keep in mind, $5,000 is not their highest reward. Drop down a little bit further and you see a line there titled $10,000. There were some researchers that received $10,000 for their vulnerability. That's how critical the issue was. And then drop a little further down, $7,500. Again, really significant vulnerabilities being reported to receive that kind of payout. So over time, the volume of valid bugs being reported to Google is decreasing. And we see this in a lot of bounty programs, that over time, as vulnerabilities get weeded out and reported, they are receiving a lower volume of submissions from the public security researchers. And what also ends up happening is the payouts go up, because you have to increase incentives to get researchers to go looking for the harder to find vulnerabilities. What's interesting when you compare these two charts, Google's statement with their report was, based on interviews, surveys, and this graph, we conclude that finding bugs in Google products is becoming harder over time, forcing frequent researchers to search for more complex vulnerabilities. And anybody who runs a bug bounty would view that as success. They've incentivized vulnerability discovery to make it harder and more costly to find vulnerabilities. And so we would call this a big success. I also want to shout out to the Google team, just take a couple graphs and draw some conclusions, but they went the extra step of surveying and interviewing their crowd members to get additional context on what this data means, because it's easy to make assumptions and correlations, and they went a little good job there. This map is showing the countries where Google sends rewards, and in all honesty, not my favorite map. Europe is clearly submitting the most bugs. It's interesting to see that Asia and Africa submit more valid reports than researchers based in America. But all in all, this kind of gives you an overall view of where those researchers are, and they're all over the world, as you can see: Australia, Latin America, Africa, Asia, Europe, and North America. Nobody has yet reported a bug from Antarctica, it appears. So going on to Facebook. Facebook is another company that has a large public bug bounty program, and they also published data from 2014 where they had 17,011 submissions, which is a 16% increase year over year, of which 61 were high severity bugs, almost 50% increase year over year. Now, they obviously had more valid submissions than just 61, but those were the things that they identified as critical issues that make, tremendous value to the program and earn their top rewards. Their minimum reward is $500. And their geography, they didn't provide a map, but they did say they have 65 countries receiving rewards out of 123 countries reporting bugs. So again, very global spread and distribution there. When we look at the payouts, they paid out $1.3 million to 321 researchers with an average reward of $1,788. But The top 5 researchers out of those 321 researchers took home $250,000. So that's a pretty big chunk of that overall reward pool going to 5 researchers submitting high value, very critical vulnerabilities. The alternative interpretation would be they submitted a absolute ton of low severity issues, but the scales of economy simply don't work very well that way. It's clearly much easier to earn large rewards with large bugs. So what are the top countries these bugs come from? India, you cannot beat India when it comes to volume. They brought in 196 valid bugs to Facebook last year, which is huge and very significant. Egypt had 81, USA had 61, UK is 28, and the Philippines at 27. So those are their top 5 countries worldwide out of all those countries we talked about submitting to their program. But it's not all about volume. I mean, that's the whole point of this webinar and this presentation is criticality, severity, impact over purely volume. So let's take a look at impact and average bug value. In India, the average bug value is 1,343 for a total of $263,000 sent to India. In Egypt, 1,220. USA, who submitted fewer bugs than Egypt, has a higher average payout per bug, which suggests that those bugs are higher criticality because they're having higher payouts and higher rewards. The UK, even higher than in the US. Some work there is resulting in an average of $2,768 per bug, and in the Philippines, 1,093 per bug. Now, when this data is presented, obviously we don't get breakdowns of criticality or, potentially there's another country that has an even higher average payout per vulnerability. This is simply the data that's publicly available. But what's interesting is, all told, these 5 countries account for 48% of Facebook's total 2014 payout. So there's still a ton of vulnerabilities that received rewards outside of these 5 countries, and this is the value to Facebook, is they're getting a global security team reporting issues to them that they can then go fix. GitHub has a vulnerability program, and in their very first year, happy birthday GitHub Bounty, they had 73 vulnerabilities identified and fixed out of 1,920 submissions. They had 33 researchers receive rewards of $50,100. Only 57 of the 73 vulnerabilities received rewards, and their minimum reward is $200. At the close of their first year, they doubled their bounty payout maximums. So they felt that this was a successful program for them and worth doubling the rewards. But the other nice thing about the GitHub report is they showed their bounty submissions per week for that first year, and how, as with Google, things drop off over time. Now, the Google VRP program wasn't in their first year, so you didn't see the initial big spike and then the drop. But this, again, as I said earlier, is very consistent across bounty programs, that you have an initial spike and then things drop off over time. This doesn't necessarily mean that as time goes on, you're not continuing to get critical vulnerabilities. I've spoken with Zane Lackey, who previously ran the bug bounty program in Etsy, and he said it was between months 6 and 8 that they got some of their most critical and devastating submissions to their bounty program. So having the program available long term, you're still going to be getting value out of that, even if the initial volume has dropped off. Microsoft also has a bounty program. They do not publish data on the volume of submissions. They have a Hall of Fame for valid paid bugs. And so they have an online services bounty with rewarded 46 submissions since its launch in late September 2014. So they weren't even around for all of 2014. And they had rewarded 46 submissions at the time that I spoke at Black Hat. They may have rewarded more since then. But the reward amounts are not published. Their rewards are from $500 to $15,000. Their much larger reward program is for mitigation bypasses. You can earn up to $100,000 for exploiting mitigations in the operating system. And then on top of that, if you add to that mitigation bypass submission a defense strategy, they can pay you up to another $100,000 because you've gone beyond just breaking the application, but helping them fix it, which adds additional value. So you'll see a number of programs have defensive bounties as well, where the payouts are higher if you assist in writing the fix. So being ahead of the game by identifying exploit techniques helps them ensure that their environment is more secure, and that's their goal in holding this, even though they get just as much noise as the other programs we've taken a look at. They have different rewards for different behaviors. The honor roll means that the researcher received a cash reward in all cases. But in software, where there's a CVE associated with a vulnerability in on-premise applications that the customer has to patch, there's also acknowledgement in the advisory credits with that CVE number. In online services, you still have that honor roll if you received a cash reward, but they also have acknowledgement for disclosure of a valid issue that did not receive a bounty. So they've differentiated the honor roll between rewardable vulnerabilities and simply you reported something that was valid but not rewardable. We still want to acknowledge that you partnered with us to report that. The other thing that Microsoft differentiates is their researchers. So the researchers who are submitting on software vulnerabilities, the on-premise software, the mitigation bypasses, things like that, those are primarily North America, then Asia, and then Europe. But when you get to looking at online services, now you're at 41% of the submissions coming from India. And so this is another interesting differentiation. It's important to understand when you're, when you're running a program, what you're getting out of it and who's working on it, and understanding your crowd for that bounty program. So as I said, 41% for India, and then 25% from Europe, and 15% from Asia, excluding India. And then North America comes in at 8% instead of the software side of things. In the mitigation bypass vulnerability, you can see some of the payouts going to researchers are very large. Unlike in online services, Microsoft does publish the mitigation bypass reward amounts and who they went to. And these researchers applied technical and creative skill to think like an attacker, but act like a defender. And so these contributions to Microsoft security are non-trivial and make it worth sifting through noise reports of, invalid or out of scope issues, because these are simply so valuable to the business and securing Microsoft customers. So at BugCrowd, I have access to data on a lot of bounty programs, it turns out, and so I'm going to talk a little bit about that too. We have recently published the State of Bug Bounty report, and so the data I'm going to talk about is from there, and I'll point out any adjustments since then, but we reported on 166 customer programs. There were 37,227 submissions in that report, of which just under 8,000 were non-duplicate, and we rewarded 3,621 vulnerabilities. The total paid out across this time span was $724,839, which is an average reward of $200.81, with a top reward of $10,000. So while the average is around $200, rewards did go up as high as $10,000. There were a number of really big bugs that got submitted. On average, each program, each one of those 166 customers received an average of 4.39 critical or high priority vulnerabilities. So that is a P1 or a P2 in our lingo, and we'll talk about what those mean in just a moment. Total across the 166 customers, we had 729 high priority vulnerabilities, 175 of which were rated critical. So again, some pretty significant bugs coming out of this, not just low severity, low impact stuff, and you do get those as well, and you do still want to prioritize those in your business model, but there are some real gems out there that you definitely want to know about and fix. So what exactly do we mean when we say critical or severe or high priority vulnerabilities? And these, at the critical level, are vulnerabilities that cause privilege escalation on the platform from privilege to admin. And we give some examples of the bug types for web applications. Now, for mobile applications, IoT, host infrastructure, desktop applications, the bug types are different. And really, we're trying to come at this from two different directions. Fundamentally, severity is driven by impact. But it helps to talk about both models with both researchers and customers. So what you don't see on this list for P1 or P2, for example, is an insecure direct object reference or an IDOR. And that's because that's currently listed in our P3 layer, but it depends on the impact of the vulnerability. So an insecure direct object reference results in disclosure of a memory location for the application. That would be a P3 vulnerability. But if you have a direct object reference that results in information disclosure of user credentials and passwords in a file in the database, that would be critical. So focus on things that do elevation of privilege to admin, remote code execution, allow financial theft. Those are the kind of things we're talking about with critical vulnerabilities. And when we're talking about the high vulnerabilities or severe vulnerabilities, these are things that affect the security of the platform and processes it supports. So again, some examples of what those are, but it's really about impact here. Who finds these vulnerabilities? We talked about the global distribution for Google, for Facebook, for Microsoft. At BugCrowd, as with all the other programs, they're professional pen testers and consultants, former developers, IT admins, university students worldwide. At the time of this presentation and at the time of the State of Bug Bounty report, we had over 18,000 researchers signed up for BugCrowd in 147 countries worldwide. As of today, we're over 19,000 researchers worldwide. And the bug submissions as they come into us look about like this geographically. India having really high numbers of submissions, followed by US, Pakistan, Great Britain, and the Philippines, followed by all the other countries put together. So that's some of what the program distributions look like and the types of vulnerabilities that come in through these programs in aggregate. Let's talk about some specific bugs. And let's start with one from Google. A couple researchers in Sweden, Fredrik Almroth and Matthias Carlson, identified an XXE in production at Google that they exploited using a toolbar button gallery. Fredrik had read through the API specifications, thought, I bet if we mess around here, we can do some nasty things. And he crafted his own button using some XML entities and ended up with an XXE attack when the title and description fields were printed out searching for buttons. So the root cause had to do with XML parsers that were blindly interpreting some of the user-supplied XML documents. What this could have resulted in is local file access, SSRF, and remote file includes. You could get a denial of service for sure, possibly remote code execution. So they reported this to Google, and within 20 minutes, Google had responded. And Fredrik and Matthias asked, so how much would an XXE in production earn you? And Google responded with this. That was their response. They earned a rather significant bounty. I believe this was at the $10,000 level, and they went out and had a really good time celebrating that find. There's a great blog post about their work on this that we will share when we post the slides online. But great find. In Facebook, Reginaldo Silva reported an XML entity vulnerability, external entity vulnerability in a PHP page. So what happened is he had identified some vulnerabilities in OpenID, and then sometime later thought, hey, I wonder if this is applicable to Facebook as well. And it turned out it was. And the flaw disclosed Facebook's a password, and if the file were left unresolved, someone who came across it could have changed Facebook's use of Gmail as an OpenID provider to something else. And so this was pretty significant. Reginaldo is based in Brazil. He earned $33,500 for reporting this to them, and today he works at Facebook. So that turned out pretty well for both of them, I would say, to get that patched. Another Facebook vulnerability, which was identified, was for a malicious user to delete any photo album. Now, you may have heard about this in the media, and this researcher found this vulnerability when he was messing around with some of the APIs, and he found he was trying to delete one of his own photo albums using the Graph Explorer access token, and discovered he could do more than just delete his photo albums. He could delete anybody's photo albums. And again, this was a logical extension of research that he was doing on his own, and reported this into Facebook for a significant reward. We have a few critical vulnerabilities that were reported to BugCrowd customers by researchers in our crowd, and the researchers had requested from the customer permission to disclose these vulnerabilities, and that was granted, which I'm happy to tell you a little bit more about these bugs today. First one, Simple, they're an online bank, and they had a cross-domain information disclosure vulnerability reported. And I could tell you more about this, but I'd rather let the researcher who found it tell you himself.
Hi, I'm going to cover a quick overview of the SSI vulnerability reported to Simple by BugCrowd last month. It's worth noting at this stage that Simple responded both quickly and professionally to this report. The initial response was provided in less than a day, with the patch being pushed to production not long afterwards. As this issue has been patched, I've replicated this behavior for this presentation and included a few screen captures from the process. As for a start, kudos to Simple for actually using HSTS on your website. A very quick test of 8 well-known banking institutions and financial providers yielded one other site configured to use HSTS. This vulnerability was found by running through a simple sign-up process while capturing all traffic for review. After the process was mostly complete, and I say mostly as I didn't bother completing account verification for this testing account, the captured traffic was reviewed for anything that stood out. From a quick glance, I found that there was something very interesting about the boot.js script loaded when the user logs in. As shown in the screen capture, this boot.js file seems to contain some interesting data assigned to the Windows simple boot data variable as a string of JSON. If we re-indent this JSON so it's a little bit more readable, you can see here that this JavaScript file appears to have been personalized with quite a lot of user information. Phone number, email address, date of birth, full name of the user. Everything's here. Unfortunately, however, there did not appear to be any one-time tokens or XSSI mitigation in the returned output. As a result, something quick and dirty like the following JavaScript snippet embedded in a website would be enough to access any of this information in a drive-by fashion. That is to say, a user only needs to visit a website containing this code, or a slight variation thereof, after having recently logged into Simple to have this information harvested silently in the background without their knowledge. We'll see the output of this in just a moment, but first, if we have a quick look at the request performed silently in the background after this page has been accessed, we can see that the browser has gone and fetched the remote script as requested by the potentially malicious page, and included cookies known to the browser as part of this request. It's worth noting that the cookie header here is a little bit messed up as I've chopped out any one-time strings from the output. That said, now that we've confirmed this data is able to be accessed quite freely across domain, let's give it a proper shot and see what happens. Yep, all data is accessible to our external domain. From here, it will be quite trivial to silently save this information and render something innocuous to the page, or redirect the user elsewhere. As mentioned at the start of this presentation, Simple have since patched this issue and removed all sensitive data from this boot.js script. Thanks again to Simple for their quick turnaround, and to BugCrowd for making it easy to report and track this issue with.
So Peter did some fantastic research. He went ahead and confirmed that issue affected several configurations, different operating systems, different browsers, demonstrated persistence of the issue, and that it wasn't an edge case. And Simple got it fixed really quickly because this was obviously rather significant to them. And so our thanks to Simple for allowing Peter to disclose the issue, and to Peter for participating in this today. I think it's important to recognize the researchers who are doing the work. So moving on to our next.
Hi.
Oh,
I'm going to cover a quick.
Sorry. Moving on to the next bug we're going to talk about is a vulnerability from that was reported to Smartsheet by a researcher named Clifford Trago. And this was Clifford's first private bounty invitation. And he lives in the Philippines. And so this launched at midnight his time, and he stayed up to work on it. Smartsheet is an online collaboration and business productivity software application. They have both web and mobile apps with 65,000 customers and 6 million users, including companies like Google, Cisco, Uber, Toyota, and Facebook. Clifford found a way to take over any user account without any user interaction. So this is, as I mentioned earlier, a insecure direct object reference that results in elevation of privilege, and that elevation of privilege caused this to be a critical vulnerability. Clifford, instead of submitting a video talking about the bug, he gave me some content to share, and we'll share his blog post with you as well, where you can go read in detail about the work he did on this. But the bug he identified was in the import user feature. And there's 4 different user roles in Smartsheet. There's a licensed user, system admin, group admin, and resource viewer. And what he found is that if he followed the import process right up until you hit the import button, and then fire up an intercept proxy, change the value of parameter 1 to a victim target account, the verification email would be sent to the imported attacker-controlled email, because there was no check on whether the user who was requesting the import had the right privilege. So logged into his own account, he could change settings on someone else's account. And he again received permission to disclose from Smartsheet, but as you can see here, there's his blog post where he talks about the flaw in the upload import endpoint, and the user ID being a string of numbers. So while you wouldn't necessarily know whose user ID you were inputting, you could simply randomly select them and start adding yourself to different user accounts. Obviously, Smartsheet got this fixed very quickly. Again, as soon as these P1 type bugs come in, customers, any vendor, whether it's a BugCrowd customer or a company like Google, Facebook, GitHub, they hop right on top of those and get them fixed as quickly as possible. So here's another example. And then the third example I have to talk to you about today is another insecure direct object reference leading to elevation of privilege. And this was a vulnerability submitted through our platform to Tesla while Tesla was running a private bug bounty with us on their website. And this was for a couple weeks before they went to a public program, just to kind of work out how the whole system was going to work. And this researcher found that he was able to log in to the service site and then simply navigate to other sites that were in the admin space. And there he was able to delete, modify, and publish documents. Now I'm going to go ahead and play video of Shantan talking about this vulnerability, and as you can see there, there's also a link to the blog post where he writes about this.
Hi guys, this is Shantan Balwai. I'm an independent InfoSec researcher. I reported a bug to teslamotors.com, which is authentication bypass bug, which allowed me to access the administrator account of subdomain of Tesla Motors. Coming to the bug details, Tesla Motors launched their bug bounty program via BugCrowd. As soon as they launched the bug bounty program, I reported few issues to them, which includes an IDOR, which was rewarded by them. I need to appreciate the response of teslamotors.com because they were fast. And after a day, they launched their bug bounty program. And I was playing with the subdomain of teslamotors.com, and I just added a /admin to the URL. I was expecting a 404 response, but I got a response of 302 redirect to some static.teslamodos.com. So I drafted my intention. So I just poking into the URL and I again appended the URL /admin/some random text, which gave me error access denied. So I made a confirmation that the admin panel of the subdomain exists. So I did a fast directory put where I was able to find a modules folder where there is no authentication on that URL. So which allowed me to edit or delete some existing documents or even to add a new document. Again, I need to appreciate the response of teslamodos.com, where they come back with a beautiful response and they patch the vulnerability in less time. Making this as an opportunity, I would like to thank my friend NB Sriharsha, who gave me the idea of getting admin panel. So thank you.
So as you can see, again, amazing vulnerabilities come from all over the world, and in this case, Shantan was able to identify a way that malicious users could redirect purchases, change orders, anything in the service portal. And I believe Tesla had this fixed in a matter of hours. We weren't even talking days from the time the report came in. So again, great critical vulnerability. So let's talk for a minute, not so much about the researcher side of things, but the customer side, the defense side. How do customers who are having vulnerabilities come in of all priority levels find those P1s faster? How do you rapidly triage and get to that? Whether you have vulnerabilities submitted through a secure web form or encrypted email, be sure you're collecting the right information. Tell the researchers in your program brief what information you require in a submission for maximum reward. And if the researcher isn't providing it automatically, give feedback. Maybe you want CVSS. Maybe you want to know the STRIDE model. Is this information disclosure? Is it tampering? Is it remote code execution and an elevation of privilege? Is authentication required? Whatever helps you sift through the bugs, be sure to ask for it. If you set those expectations up front and say this is tied to rewards, researchers want to get the best possible reward, and they will generally comply with providing the information you ask for. How well is the vulnerability submission written? Did they spell check? Does it follow industry standards in APA format? No, I'm just kidding. You're looking for a vulnerability to fix. You know, give the researchers a secure way to provide you with a video of the POC in case English is a second language. Don't get hung up over typos. If you have questions because you're not sure you understand what they're saying, go ahead and ask. Have a dialogue with that researcher. That researcher is already committed to wanting to get this bug to you and wanting to help you fix it. So, you know, make sure you have a really good understanding of what it is and what it does, and don't get hung up on that communication piece. Have a really clear in and out of scope documentation. This is going to help you keep researchers focused on the vulnerabilities you care most about. It also gives you a really fast way to reject out of scope bugs as out of scope. You can simply say, look, right here, out of scope, appreciate that you submitted it, appreciate the time, but this is not eligible for reward, and it cuts down on debate about why didn't you reward this. Saves you time in triage. The question then, though, is sort of Schrodinger's vulnerability. What do you do with vulnerability reports that aren't explicitly in scope and aren't explicitly out of scope? Like you didn't list something in either list, and now you've got a vulnerability in it. My recommendation from both the defense and the offense side of things is if you're going to implement a code change as a result of the report, validate and reward it, and then go update your bounty brief so that that sort of issue is on one of those two lists, either in or out of scope. But make sure you've got really clear scope documentation. So really quickly, an example from Facebook of attributes of a good report. Like I said, tell the researcher what you want in a submission. Facebook does a really nice job of that, saying, you know, what kind of detailed steps do they want, clear descriptions, quality before quantity. They talk about how to submit a video, how to have your Facebook settings set up while you're recording, things like that. This is a great example of giving the researchers that are submitting to your bounty program guidance on how you want to receive the submissions. So how else can you reduce noise? Obviously, there's guidance and training. Google has Bug Hunter University. Facebook has the Bounty Hunter's Guide. We at BugCrowd have the BugCrowd Forum, where we're providing feedback and discussion on everything from bug hunting tradecraft and techniques and methodology to discussions around how to communicate vulnerabilities to customers. Am I saying you need to create one of these? Nope. Nope, nope. But know what's out there and point people to it. You know, use other people's content as a reference. If you're getting a researcher submitting vulnerabilities that they're maybe not understanding the full impact of, or they're not writing it up the way you would really like it, be familiar with other people's content that helps researchers and go ahead and point people at it. And give the researchers that feedback so that they can deliver better results to you. Otherwise, they'll continue doing what they've been doing most likely, which isn't necessarily helping you. And again, I'm going to say this several times about clear in and out of scope documentation. I beat this hammer frequently. Here's an example of Google's reward program documentation on what's non-qualifying. And you can see right there at the top, visit our Bug Hunter University page dedicated to common non-qualifying findings and vulnerabilities. They want to make it really clear up front to the researcher what is not useful to them, what is not going to get rewarded, and that's going to save the researcher's time. No researcher wants to spend time working on something that isn't going to result in a reward. So this is a great example of demonstrating that scope documentation. And direct performance feedback. Go ahead and tell that researcher what was good about their submission or what wasn't good, what you need. Obviously, be respectful, be professional, focus on it from a mentoring perspective. But if you don't tell a researcher what they're doing that is causing them problems, they have no opportunity to learn. These folks are part of a global volunteer team of pen testers that want to submit vulnerabilities and help you secure your platform. So help them do that. How can you triage more rapidly and prioritize better? And these are honestly operational recommendations for how to manage your vulnerability queue. Clear the queue daily. Don't batch up responses to submissions once a week, because if you allow yourself to get 5 days behind, a couple things will happen. First, you'll have missed the P1 that came in on Monday because you didn't look at them until Friday. But it also means if you wake up sick on Friday, who's looking at them before Monday? Now you've got a full week, and you're getting further and further behind, and the queue is getting bigger and bigger, and it just becomes harder to stay on top of. So clear your queue daily and get through those bugs. Take a look at everything. Even if you can't move it to the next phase of your investigation or resolve it, take a look at what's in there and make sure you know what's coming in. Communicate your priorities. Publicly define how you prioritize and what your minimum rewards are for each priority. This will cut down on debate with a researcher later. And you know, these are living documents. These should change as your business needs change, as new techniques and attacks come out, but have it out there. If you are communicating to the researchers what is most important to you, that's what they're going to go focus on. How to deal with duplicates. So duplicates at the P1 and P2 level are pretty uncommon because these issues are fixed rapidly. You know, if you're on the security response team and you see a critical remote code execution come in, you're not going to sit on that for a few days before getting it off to development. That gets fixed quickly. So the chances of that being duplicated by another researcher are not as high. It happens occasionally, but I'm going to say this anyway, fix quickly, and fix quickly at all severity levels. Don't expect that just because you've paid for a bug, you have all the time in the world to eventually get around to patching it. Because every time a duplicate is reported, it costs your bounty program both an operational effort for you having to close that out as a duplicate and in your researcher experience. So at lower severity levels where the duplicates are more common because the fixes aren't prioritized as highly as other development work, you'll also end up having to justify to the second and maybe the third and maybe the fourth researcher that they weren't first and tell them when it was reported before. And quite frankly, if the same bug is being found once a week, you know that's being pretty easily found by the bad guys too. So get the fixes out as soon as practical and save yourself the headache. Other things you can do, again, defined vulnerability taxonomy. An example of communicating priorities can be seen in how LastPass has done their bounty brief with vulnerability priorities and what the reward values are. And you're thinking, wow, this is an awful lot of work. Is it really worth the hassle? These customers definitely think so. These are verbatim quotes from customers who chose not to be attributed. And that's okay, but as you can see in Mortal Kombat terms, it's a fatality. I can understand why they didn't want to be attributed with that. And then their customer said, even if we get nothing else from this bounty, they ran a 2-week proof of concept program. They felt that one vulnerability that came in was worth the entire program, given the critical nature. They patched the production service that night and reviewed all the logs to be sure it had never been exploited and they just missed it. So these customers definitely seem to think that it's worth the effort of running a bounty program. So how do you reduce noise? We've talked about sifting through the noise to find those P1s and how to get to the signal faster, but how do you just reduce noise completely? Well, publish and stick to your program SLA. Like, be accountable, because researchers appreciate that, and they're going to do better work for you if that's how it is. And also, when I say stick to your program SLA, if there's a vulnerability that you've indicated is out of scope or is low priority, and the researcher is arguing with you, and you decide, oh my gosh, it's just going to be easier to give them a $25 or $100 reward, or I'll just put them on the Hall of Fame, you're rewarding bad behavior. And don't do that. Don't go ahead and say it's not worth the argument. Go ahead and stick to your guns and say this is not rewardable. It's a hard conversation to have, but the reality is if it is truly a low severity vulnerability, it's a low severity vulnerability. Like, even if they went to tweet about it, it's low impact. It's not a critical issue, and allocating them some sort of credit doesn't really help. It just perpetuates their submitting low severity issues to accrue more credit. And so there's a number of other ways to do this. Like, Microsoft has a Hall of Fame for people who are rewarded, and then they have the acknowledgments for people who submit issues that aren't rewarded. That's one way to not reward the low severity things. You only get in the Hall of Fame if you got a reward. There are other companies I know that only allocate credit once per year. You can submit 15 things, but you're only getting 1 credit per year. Now, obviously, if someone submits multiple high severity issues, one would hope that that company is rewarding frequently, because you want to reward those good behaviors, but don't reward the bad behaviors. Another suggestion I've seen is if you go ahead and put everyone on a Hall of Fame because it's easier, publish with a CVSS score. So the people who are getting published with a CVSS, 7.5, 8.6, 9.3, those are pretty impressive. The people who have a whole bunch of Hall of Fame credits at like 2.4, less something to be proud of, less something to be excited about. So if you want to still, do something to acknowledge that that person submitted a vulnerability, make sure you're differentiating between your true Hall of Fame and an acknowledgement for somebody. BugCrowd has just recently announced a new metrics system for our performance rewards, and some of it was driven by stopping rewarding bad behavior. Now, for us, it wasn't that we were awarding points for out of scope or invalid findings, but we were doing nothing. They were net neutral to the researcher's reputation. So someone could submit tons of vulnerabilities that were out of scope or invalid, and occasionally they would submit some that were valid, and those valid submissions would get points, but the out of scope and invalid things that cost the program owners money to manage and clear through and triage, that had no effect on the researcher, and that now has a -1 point associated with each out of scope or invalid submission. We've also pivoted so that the high severity issues are receiving more points than they did previously, because we felt that they were more substantial and worthwhile vulnerabilities we wanted to incentivize researchers to go for. So look at your reward model, figure out, are you rewarding the good things enough, and are you not, make sure you're not rewarding the bad things. Don't create bad behavior by rewarding inconsistently. You know, if you reward more highly after lunch when you triage than you do before lunch because you're hungry, great example of inconsistency leading to bad behaviors among researchers. And you definitely want to be consistent in your rewards, which is why I recommend in your documentation with your priority levels listing your average rewards, or your minimum rewards, your minimum rewards for each priority level. If at a P1 your minimum reward is $1,500, go ahead and put that in your bounty brief or in your scope sheet so that researchers know what they're working towards. It will also help you triage faster, because once you set the priority, the amount is relatively clear. You don't have to kind of be like, well, this one feels a little bit better. You can just be more quick, more consistent, and more fair in your awards. Be sure you fix things quickly. Again, that cuts down on bad behavior. If you fix the reward quickly, you have set a behavioral model where the researcher submits more frequently and does more research, because they're getting that gratification. I submitted a vulnerability, it got triaged quickly, I got rewarded quickly. I want to go find another vulnerability for these folks, versus I submitted a vulnerability, it's been 4 weeks, I don't know what they're doing with it, I don't know if I'm getting rewarded. Get those things fixed quickly, and you will incentivize the researchers to come back and continue submitting. And once again, documentation. Always have that out there. So, the short-term summary. Yes, bug bounties do successfully generate high severity vulnerability disclosures. They're providing some very real impact to application security, whether you're a small startup or a large enterprise vendor like a Microsoft or a Google. And crowdsourcing is going to engage skilled researchers around the world that you probably have never heard of. You never would have gotten them on a consulting engagement. You never would have had their application catch your eye. And yet they're submitting fantastic value to your program. So to get a diverse global talent pool submitting vulnerabilities to you, some of the best, most prominent researchers in the industry, as well as folks you've never heard of, crowdsourcing is definitely a solution for that. And the call to action, you knew it was coming. Write strong scope documentation. Set those expectations up front, not only on what's in and out of scope, but what you want in a submission. Provide feedback to the researchers that submit to your program. Stay consistently engaged. Stay on top of that queue. Fix things quickly. Respond to questions from the researchers, or if they're commenting on bugs. If you stay consistently engaged, again, that's going to incentivize the right behavior. And reward good behavior. Make sure you're rewarding it fairly. If you're going to make a code change and you're going to make it in a, this is important enough to make in 8 hours and to keep your dev team late, let's be sure you're rewarding that at a really appropriate level so that that researcher feels, hey, I want to submit more stuff to this program because they take it seriously, they fix it quickly, they rewarded me well, and they're going to talk to their researcher friends. You're going to get more high value, high severity vulnerabilities out of that. So I will open up to any questions that we might have, and I'm happy to answer. Peyton?
Yeah, thanks, Kymberlee. We're running maybe a little short on questions, but if you'd like to answer a few of these, that's awesome. We've also started a thread on our forum where we'd love you guys to submit comments or questions that Kymberlee will be answering after this program. We'll also make sure to send this recording with all the details and Kymberlee's slides by the end of the day.
Sounds good. Well, let me just grab one of the questions that I see, which is, what about out-of-scope vulnerability submissions that are valid and require code change? And I'm going to talk about that, but I'm also going to pivot a little bit and talk about how things are prioritized at the lower levels. So when something is out of scope but still requires a code change, you know, generally speaking, that is at the program discretion. If it is clearly defined in the bounty brief as out of scope, it is out of scope and unrewardable. And those are the rules that were set out. Those were the rules the researcher went into it with. In many cases, the researchers will submit those vulnerabilities and say, I know this is out of scope, but I wanted to be sure you knew about it. And in those cases, you know, you want to thank the researcher for that. Maybe you did already know about it. Maybe that's why it was out of scope. It was a known issue, but you know, they did take the time to make sure you were aware. So be appreciative, but you are not obligated or required to reward for it. Now, if you choose to, if they shine a new light on it that you maybe weren't aware of or show added severity, you may make the choice to go ahead and reward it, but it's an out of band, not an a for sure. It's purely at your discretion. When it comes to some of the lower severity things, that, you know, we'll see things sometimes that are best practices around mitigations, and that's also at the program owner's discretion. So generally speaking, best practices are considered by many programs to be won't fix, and it's something that they implement in their next major release potentially, but they don't patch to introduce a mitigation. But some programs find those to be tremendously valuable. If they get an excellent report stating, hey, you're not encrypting your data at rest on this mobile application, and while that in and of itself is a mitigation, it conjoined with other vulnerabilities that makes them more severe, you know, you may choose to go ahead and reward that. But again, program owner discretion on that.